All right, so we're looking at the Exile to Babylon today.
Good times.
Yes. I forgot to update that slide. We're no longer in the divided monarchy where we have camped out since January. We are in the Exile.
Did I miss a handout last week?
Probably. I will retrieve it for you later.
Okay.
It was just Kings of Judah.
Okay.
And only half of them.
Let me see if I have any to spare. Actually, I do.
All right, so we have wrapped up 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles. We are mostly through the book of Jeremiah. Technically, we are getting a little bit of that today. But the exile is largely covered in the book of Ezekiel and Daniel. This is actually going to be like one of those movies that has a triple plot line going on, and so we're going to weave them all together today. One thing I noticed is that I had Mother's Day pegged as the wrong Sunday. Mother's Day this year is actually on the 14th of May. So we actually will finish all the Old Testament lessons on May 7th, with Esther being the last one. And the 21st will be our final day, and I think we'll have some special activities. If you are available on Sunday, May 21st, sometime mid-afternoon onwards, we will come up with... that could be part of the evening if it's requested.
We could break the good food
But I was thinking ultimate frisbee and pizza, amongst other things. So, have that on your radar and agenda for May 21st. Anyway, so this week the exile, next week the return era begins. We'll split it between 2 weeks, one covering Ezra and Nehemiah, and then the third or last week will be Esther. Same time frame, different location. So in getting exiled to Babylon, we always like to think of it as a clean, tidy, one era stops and another era begins. And the flood is like that because you have the pre-flood era and you have the post-flood era, and there is no overlap because the flood completely and cleanly separates one from the next. It is not the case with the exile era at all, in any way, shape, or form, because there are 4 waves of exile over to Babylon. The first one is in 607, the next one is in 599. We've actually talked about those 2. The third one happens in 588, and those people were en route to Babylon with Nebuchadnezzar, where we stopped off. We didn't actually get to 584. I didn't know that one existed because I had missed it in the scriptures until just a month ago. There was a 4th time that Nebuchadnezzar carted more people from Judah off to Babylon.
Why, so did he just need a workforce or what?
No, he was just in the neighborhood and he decided they keep doing bad things we'll talk about here shortly, and so we'll cart off some more of them.
That's over the course of like
Were
20
there any
years.
more after that to cut off?
I don't think so.
Wait,
It was largely depopulated at that point.
In 588, he left just a couple super poor people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he then carted off those super poor people in 584?
It's not that clean. We'll talk about that tonight. Because we left off last week at 588. So we're going to go backwards just a little bit, and we're going to see the 3 different plot lines going. And the nice thing is that each plot line is connected to one of the major prophets. One's connected to Daniel, another one's connected to Ezekiel, and the third one is connected to Jeremiah. So first exile is in 607 BC. This is when Jehoiakim is on the throne. He had been placed there by Pharaoh Necho. Nebuchadnezzar comes in because he is hoovering up all of the little tributary states that had aligned with Egypt as he was destroying Egypt's power. And so Jehoiakim, rather than suffer awful ruin, shifts allegiance over to Nebuchadnezzar. After a few years of siege, starts paying tribute to Babylon. It's at this time, though, that Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, more commonly known as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, get taken off to Nebuchadnezzar's court. And they begin serving in Nebuchadnezzar's court, which triggers the beginning of Jeremiah's 70 years. And it's at that time that Jeremiah prophesies, actually, that it's going to be 70 years that they're over there.
this one's associated with Daniel.
Yes, that is the one associated with Daniel.
And weren't, like, these guys who were with the other young men who were essentially, ethnically cleansed?
Ethnically reprogrammed.
Reprogrammed.
Yep. Yep, they were Babylonianizing the Jews that they took into the court. Second exile is in 599. Jehoiakim's son ascends on the throne while Nebuchadnezzar is laying siege to Jerusalem. He wisely decides to surrender rather than let the siege run its full course. At this time, the good figs Jeremiah prophesies about are taken off to Babylon. This includes 7,000 fighting men, 1,000 craftsmen, artisans, the whole king's household, and the king himself, Jehoiakim.
So basically all the people of value.
Yep, he takes the next layer of Judean society and valuable, skillful workers. This is when Ezekiel gets exiled. This is actually the largest number of people to get exiled that's recorded.
So this severely affects
Judah's economy, I imagine.
Most likely. So then we get to the third exile. This is the one associated with Jeremiah. This is when Jerusalem is defeated after an 18-month-long siege. The walls get broken down, the temple, the palaces, and the houses of Jerusalem get burned down. Zedekiah the king gets blinded and then imprisoned in Babylon, and we don't hear any more of him, so he presumably dies in prison in Babylon. And at this point, there are still people left in Judah, although a number of them get taken off, but the poorest of the poor are left to work the land, harvest the crops, and be able to send tribute off to Babylon. And Gedaliah, who is the grandson of Josiah's secretary Shaphan, is the one who's appointed governor of Judah. Now, I didn't go hunting this down, but I suspect that he was a Jew who surrendered to Nebuchadnezzar while he had laid siege to Jerusalem and was in good graces, because some people were surrendering and not staying in Jerusalem, which is kind of wise. But Jeremiah was in Jerusalem prophesying, surrender and you live. If you stay in the city, you die. And some people listened to Jeremiah, but not most people, and they wouldn't let Jeremiah himself surrender.
Why?
I'm not actually sure. So this is the first plot line we're going to run with here. So Gedaliah rules, and he actually rules from Mizpah in Benjamin. So this is a city that probably is a little less destroyed than Jerusalem. It's just north of Jerusalem because the tribal allotment of Benjamin was right in the neighborhood of Jerusalem. So not too far away. While he's there, Nebuchadnezzar and his army move away, taking the exiles with them. And then all the army officers and the men in the army that had fled the city and were hiding from the Babylonians come out of hiding, and they come to Gedaliah. And Gedaliah swears an oath, don't rebel against Babylon. I'll represent you before the king. You won't be destroyed. You won't be killed. And one of these officers was Ishmael, son of Nethaniah. And at the same time, a whole bunch of Jews that had fled from Judah to the neighboring countries started returning. And so they're coming back from Moab, Ammon, Edom, and all the other countries where they had fled to. So it looks like peace is going to establish itself in the land, and the poorest of the poor start collecting the summer harvest, and they get a lot of oil and a lot of summer fruit. And it looks like things might be okay. However, there was a plot, and like a mere 3 months after all this, maybe a year and 3 months, but it's in the 7th month of the year, and the siege ended in the 4th month of the year, that Gedaliah gets assassinated. And there was a conspiracy. The king of the Ammonites wanted to take him out, and he had sent Ishmael, the son of Nethaniah, to assassinate Gedaliah. People warned him. I think Jeremiah even warned him. He didn't believe that there was a conspiracy, and it cost him his life. And so he died. So the Jews realize that was really stupid. We just killed Babylon's governor, and we don't have an army, and we don't have a walled city to defend ourselves in, and this is going to be really bad. So Jehohanan, son of Kareah, ends up being the de facto leader of the remnant of Jews that are there and all the army officers that came back. And they consult with Jeremiah, and Jeremiah gives them a very clear, specific word. Stay in the land and you live, flee to Egypt and you die. So the Jews obviously choose the most reasonable selection, flee to Egypt.
Yeah.
He could not have made it any clearer, but they didn't believe him, even though Jeremiah had been prophesying with like 100% accuracy rate. Like, if you leave the city and surrender to the Babylonians, you'll live. If you stay in the city, you're going to die. And that by and large happened. They decide, we're too terrified of the king of Babylon. And you do have to remember they had just lived through the siege, saw Jerusalem get destroyed, felt the full might of the Babylonian army crushing Judah. So there's a lot of PTSD, I'm sure, that was associated with that. However, they disobey God, they flee to Egypt, and the remnant then settles down in Migdal, Tahpanhes, and Memphis in Lower Egypt. And Lower Egypt is closer to the Mediterranean Sea. Lower is lower in elevation. Upper Egypt is to the south, the higher stretches of the river. So then Jeremiah starts prophesying death and destruction to all of them for disobeying God and for going down to Egypt where they're never supposed to ever go. Because remember, this was disobeying a command of the Israelites way back in the Exodus period. They were not supposed to return to Egypt. And it took them 1,000 years, but they ended up returning back to Egypt.
Is there a command they didn't break? Like, in all reality, is there a command that God gave them that they didn't actually
Be fruitful and multiply. We do that one. That command mankind has worked with. We can do that.
That one since Noah, isn't it?
That's a good answer.
I was talking more so for the Jews, but that'll work, I guess.
Yeah, that was. I can't objectively assess the other 613 commands of the Mosaic Law, but I know that one from the beginning we've done well at. Let's see. So it's not directly recorded in Jeremiah as far as the circumstances of this, but this is the time frame of the fourth exile. Most of the remnant goes down to Egypt. A few people apparently hang back in Judah. And there's one verse in Jeremiah that says that in the 23rd year of Nebuchadnezzar, which would be 4 or 5 years after Jerusalem fell, that he took a further 745 Jews into exile in Babylon. And other historical, extra-biblical historical accounts really corroborate with this really nicely, because we know that Nebuchadnezzar was in the neighborhood. He was laying siege to the city of Tyre, and that took forever and almost was not successful. I think that was the longest siege in ancient history. I think it took 30 years.
30 years in constant siege?
Yep.
How did they grow food?
They didn't have to. They were a trading port.
So they just had
Mhm.
ships coming.
They just had ships coming and going from Carthage and other places in Africa that they had colonies. If you have a port, you can bring food in. Life goes well and easily.
Babylon didn't have a navy to stop that?
No, they were a land power. They weren't a sea power. So Alexander the Great learned from the Babylonian problem, and he's like, to heck with this. We're just going to build a bridge and connect, or not build a bridge, build a causeway and connect Tyre to the mainland so that we can just march into the city. Because we can't starve them out. They'll always have food coming in through the ships. So
What is Tyre?
Alexander the Great
Or what?
laid waste in 9 months. And it was his hardest, most difficult siege, but he got him.
Fast, really.
Fast relative to the Babylonians. I mean, 30 years of a siege. Like, you have soldiers that are rotating in and out to maintain the siege, and sons and grandsons might be in this army laying siege to that city. But anyway, while he was in the neighborhood, he also sent an army down to subdue Ammon and Moab. Remember, Ammon was connected to the conspiracy that killed Gedaliah. While he was around there, he just collected and rounded up a few more Jews. We don't know if it was a punitive measure or if he was rescuing them in some way. The Babylonians may have said they were rescuing them, and they were actually just being carted off against their will. But this is actually the fourth exile out that I discovered. So that wraps up one plot line. Now we'll go back to Daniel's plot line.
Oh, I'm like almost have a note.
So Makai needs another piece of paper.
I won't rip it out this time.
Okay.
You ripped it out?
Yes.
Well, yeah, you got it and you couldn't put it in your thing. I ripped it out.
Wait, why couldn't you have just kept it pristine?
Because I didn't think that until afterwards.
So in Babylon, things proceed with a little bit more pomp and ceremony. Daniel is serving King Nebuchadnezzar, and that lasts for like 45 years. And this is covered in Daniel's chapter 1 through 4. So a lot of Daniel's service to the king is not actually fully recorded, just a few highlights. What are you laughing at?
Evil Merodach.
Yes, evil Murdoch. I'll get to that in a minute. This looks really funny, doesn't it? So, Daniel 2, Daniel interprets Nebuchadnezzar's dream. The next chapter is when the three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, make their stand and survive the fiery furnace. Daniel chapter 4 is a really unique chapter because it was actually written by Nebuchadnezzar. He's one of the authors of the Old Testament.
That's funny.
It's a letter he wrote. And he's talking about his 7 years of insanity. The interesting theme from Daniel 2, 3, and 4 is you see that Nebuchadnezzar's revelation of God changes. In Daniel 2, he's just one of the gods. In Daniel 3, he's the most powerful of the gods. In Daniel 4, he's actually really the only god, and we're all nothing. And that was part of the meditation that we had here today.
7 years.
Yes, 7 years of insanity.
Bovinity.
Yes, bovine insanity.
Insanity.
It's a new take on mad cow disease. So he's succeeded by evil Murdoch, which is not an English rendering. He was not evil. This is just a transliteration of a name. Amel Marduk is another way of transliterating his name into English. Marduk was the chief god of the Babylonians, which is actually derived from
Egypt?
Nimrod.
Why is
Oh, he was
Nimrod
a
like
character.
the source of like all these?
Yep. So the name Nimrod means in Hebrew, let us rebel. But the three primary consonants are the M, the R, and the D. The NI is actually a prefix, if you're familiar with what a prefix and a suffix are. So it's added on to the front end of it. And in Marduk, you have the chief consonants, the M and the R and the D, and the UK is a suffix added onto it. And so Marduk, the god of the Babylonians, is likely a stand-in for Nimrod. A lot of those people from the descendants of Noah, mentioned in the Table of Nations, are essentially deified. And you see that in a lot of different kingdoms, like the Romans worshipping Japheth in Jupiter. Same type of idea where the consonants are preserved.
Interesting.
And there's several others of those, some even from the pre-flood that came through. So like the Roman god Vulcan is probably a corruption of Tubal-Cain, who was the guy who figured out how to forge metal in the pre-flood world. 4 or 5 generations descended from Adam.
Presumably the Greek version of him would also be.
Maybe, maybe not. The names don't always go that cleanly. So there was a lot of cultural appropriation that happened in the ancient world, and so they would borrow gods, rename gods, and merge gods, and things like that. But in any case, evil Murdoch, or Amel Marduk, ascends the throne in 562 BC. At this point, it seems as if Daniel is retired. We don't have any episodes of him serving in any of the future administrations. This is a really significant event, though, because 2 days after he ascended the throne, it says that he released Jehoiakim from prison, which is a footnote in the Bible, but that is the key event that allows us to chronologically date every preceding event in the entire Old Testament. This is where the biblical history connects very cleanly with the secular history. We know this.
Because it's only 2 days.
Yep,
So, yeah.
it happened 2 days after he ascended the throne. Now, I've seen some discrepancies, and this depends on like which month of the year it was, whether it happened in March or April or possibly October. Some people have 562, other people have 561. That's a really tight range, and nobody's been arguing a further range in the last 400 years. Everybody's agreed within a couple months of each other on the timing of that. So, it's a very nice connection. It also helps us to very cleanly date that 70th year, or the 70 years of Jeremiah, because we know when the Jews returned. We'll get to that next week in the return era. They get back to Judah in 537. So the 70 years ended in 537. So you go 70 years back to 607. We know that's the year it started. Then the question from a biblical standpoint is what event was taking place at that time, and it's when Daniel got exiled. So we know from two different directions that is the beginning point of the exile. But you can't take 537 and go back to 607 and then claim the fall of Jerusalem as being the event that took place in that year. That's what the Jehovah's Witnesses do, but it doesn't work chronologically with the secular chronologies. And that is...
Is it hard to explain that to them?
No, I just drew up a timeline in Excel and illustrated the differences between them, and
What
they
did
just
say?
trust the central authorities. So...
I wish that was the only thing wrong with them.
That is not the only thing, that's the smallest thing, but I found that was a linchpin in some people's beliefs, so I took that one further with them. Anyhow, Evil Murdoch is not the last king of Babylon. There's several more. They're all detailed out on the timeline that I gave you. We don't need to cover all of them. The next key one that comes across in Daniel chapter 5 is Belshazzar. Now, an important thing to note, because some people say he's not a historical figure, and they are oversimplifying the case. The fact of the matter is there's like 10 different historians that talk about the fall of Babylon and who was king in Babylon, and that king happens to have 10 different names. He's the last king, and he's got the similar death story in every single one. There's a few other complicated events that were taking place, but Daniel renders his name as Belshazzar, and other historians call him by different names. It's not an uncommon thing, even in the Bible, different kings have multiple names.
Is it like the same consonants?
Hmm?
Is it like similar consonants? Or
No, like another version is Nabonidus. So, like, there's nothing the same. But, like Simon and Peter, they're not related. It's just one's a nickname and the other's a birth name.
Well, even Daniel was Belteshazzar.
Yep. And yeah. So you end up with like your throne name, your birth name, your nickname, and sometimes you collect titles through the course of your lifetime, and so that was common in Roman history. Like Scipio, the general that defeated Hannibal, ended up known as Scipio Africanus because he conquered all of Africa. And yeah, I mean,
What's his actual name?
Scipio,
That's his
How is
actual
that
name.
spelled?
Scipio,
Huh.
an amazing general.
Imagine naming your kid that.
Yes.
To be able to beat Hannibal took an amazing feat.
Yes, he took Hannibal down. Hannibal was an amazing general. He did not have a good grand strategy, and Carthage also did not have a good grand strategy. Rome had really bad generals until Scipio. He had a good strategy. Rome had a good strategy, and then they finally took Hannibal down.
Didn't Hannibal take
No, we're not going that far.
Have
Okay?
you heard the story of when they had dinner together?
I don't know.
Scipio and Hannibal after the war.
Oh, yeah, it wouldn't surprise me because I know Hannibal retired in other places, and yeah.
Hannibal was asked. Hannibal was the one that lost. He said, this one asked him, who was the greatest general of all time? He said, well, that would be Alexander. He said, number 2 would be me. And Scipio was there. He's like, hey, I just beat you.
Exactly.
He said, had I won, I would be greater than Alexander.
Yes, generals at conversation. Who is the greatest? It's just like the disciples.
Yeah, that's true.
All right, fascinating thing that takes place in the fall of Babylon, and we don't see this from the scriptural account because Belshazzar sees the writing on the wall, and then he gets assassinated that night, and Cyrus the Great's there, and Darius gets the governorship of Babylon, and we don't kind of get all the gory details of how this actually transpires. The ancient historians give us the gory details, and it's really quite fascinating because the prophet Jeremiah prophesied what Herodotus recorded as happening. And so Jeremiah, in chapter 51, verses 30 and 31, he says, "The warriors of Babylon have ceased fighting. They remain in their strongholds. Their strength has failed. They have become women. Her dwellings are on fire. Her bars are broken. One runner runs to meet another, and one messenger to meet another, to tell the king of Babylon that his city is taken on every side." And what the Persians did is they dug a really big canal to divert the Euphrates River into a depression that naturally forms in the desert. And once they had diverted the river, then all of a sudden the river that flowed through and underneath the walls of Babylon were open, and for some reason they did not have the bars down. And so the army walked under the walls and came up inside the city while Belshazzar was feasting and drinking in the palace throne room.
Genius.
It was genius, but the city was so big that even though the outer defenses had fallen, they had not yet gotten word into the center, and the center of the city is still feasting. So it was a very vicious way to go down because they were taken by surprise, not expecting it. They had enough food to last 25 years under siege or something. They didn't think they had any chance of falling, and Cyrus the Great figured out a weakness and ran with it.
You gotta think someone noticed, hey, the river's a little low.
When the king is feasting, you don't bring these bad reports to his attention.
He's drunk and he might kill you.
Yep. So that wraps up the second. This is Daniel's plot line through there. We will continue with that in the return era next week. We're going to Ezekiel. Ezekiel is the one who got exiled with the largest contingent of Jews, and they didn't land in Babylon proper. They landed along the Kibar River, and the identification of that is not precisely known, but it's somewhere in the neighborhood of Babylon, either just to the southeast or perhaps just to the northwest, but along one of the channels of the Euphrates River. And this particular map connects it to Nippur, which is there in modern-day Iraq. But anyway, so this is the neighborhood. Don't write the dates down. I have no idea why they have those dates down there.
Are they incorrect?
I don't know what they're referring to, but it doesn't refer to anything I'm talking about, so please don't write them down.
The 2017 date is correct.
Yeah, the 2017 date is correct. Anyway, so this is the neighborhood of Ezekiel, because he references being alongside the river bank of the Kibar River regularly. So, in the book of Ezekiel, he has lots of prophecies and lots of visions, and some of them are about what's going on in Judah and Jerusalem, because they haven't fallen yet fully. And some of them are about the exiles, and some of them are about a whole bunch of different things. So, these visions are given to him in the years 595 to 573 BC. 573 BC is the last one recorded. He actually makes a reference to Nebuchadnezzar's siege of Tyre, and how, even though it was so difficult and time-consuming, God was going to give him the kingdom of Egypt as compensation for all of his efforts against Tyre. Which is kind of interesting, just wouldn't think about that. I saw how much work that you put into taking Tyre, and it was really difficult, and it was very time-consuming. So to reward you for your efforts, I'm going to give you Egypt too. Okay, it's from Ezekiel's mouth. But he has a few visions. The glory departing from Israel is one of them. He has a vision of Jerusalem falling and the siege that was laid there. He does a lot of crazy things, like he lays on his side for a long time, and he switches to his other side for a little less long time.
Isn't it like to the tune of a year?
Yeah, 390 days and then 40 days.
Takes the new wall.
Yeah, he like makes a model of the city of Jerusalem with siege works and ramparts and all kinds of things, and
That sounds
So he
fun.
had all of these prophetic visions and prophetic pictures that he was acting out.
So he was like the beginning to all these like weird YouTube challenges.
Man, he would have had a really fascinating,
You could lay on their side
YouTube
for the
page.
longest.
yeah.
He was also one of the only guys who was able to convince God to change his mind a little bit.
Yes,
Because God
yes.
told him he can only cook his food with human poop, and he said, Lord, no. And God said, okay, you can use animal poop instead.
Yep. One of the few who got God to change his mind in instructions. So he also had a famous vision of a valley of dry bones, and he had a vision of Gog and Magog coming to attack the promised land. And then he has a very long vision at the end, and this is one of the last visions he's given. But Ezekiel 40 through 48 is a vision of the new temple. It is not the second temple that he is describing. It is massively larger and different.
Oh.
So it's what, Mackay?
I was gonna say it's like the fifth temple, but there's only been like 3, right?
Right. So there was Solomon's temple, the temple they built in Zerubbabel's day, and then Herod's temple was the third temple that was destroyed in 70 AD. So they're waiting for the fourth temple.
Don't they theoretically? I heard somewhere that Israel has like all the materials to build.
That's the rumor I hear over and over.
I heard that too.
Yes.
But they just have to like tear down a very special Islamic mosque.
It's not just that, the location, some people argue, I don't believe it, but they argue that the new temple can be built in the city of David. But I don't think that's true either, I think it's gonna be built where the original temple was built. But some people say there's not enough real estate there for the court of the Gentiles. But the court of the Gentiles, in my opinion, will not be part of the new temple, right? Because Jew and Gentile are considered, remember?
It's a prophecy and a dream and a vision we don't yet have the fulfillment of, and so it's a guess. And I was listening to one Presbyterian pastor who was trying to make a strong case for why that is actually completely figurative, and the church is the fulfillment of that temple. I'm like, that is outside of the box I've ever thought of on that one. So
Wait, so what does Ezekiel say about the new temple then?
we'll read at chapters 40 through 48, and you can see what he says. I'm not going to summarize that. All right, Alex is going to come up and start talking about Daniel chapter 2. Do you want the clicker, or do you want me to run the clicking from the back?
You can run it.
I will run it.
I know I screwed up some of the slide order. We wanna start with just those couple pictures of
Yep.
Nebuchadnezzar, the artist rendering, and then the stone cut.
Yep.
And then the one with the deities we'll look at after that.
Wait, what happened to the like massive like statue they built in Nebuchadnezzar?
It was made out of gold, so I'm sure it became a lot of other things.
Oh
I
yeah.
don't think we'll be able to do it.
Yeah.
Because, gold.
I mean, the city got sacked, so.
And let's just do it this way. That'll work. I don't need that. All right. Yeah, go to, that's Nebuchadnezzar on the right. We'll get to that in a second. But go to, there we go. I don't know why all of the, this is an artist rendering of Nebuchadnezzar. It seems like in all the art that I've looked at, your Akkadians, your Assyrians, and a Babylonian king have real similar beards and headdresses. I don't know if that was a fashion that lasted for so long, but that's one rendering. Now let's go to the stone cut of him, just him, and then we'll go back to the first one. There it is again. They have these really elaborate beards with these tight curls, and I'm sure there's something installed between the curls on the bottom there, and then these crazy earrings and headdresses. So he seems like kind of a rigid guy. Now let's go back to the first one. And we're going to go through chapter 2 with scriptures and art. Now remember when Pastor said when we opened up tonight that all of the magicians and the sorcerers who get all of their prophecies from evil spirits, right? They're pagan. It's connected to the devil, bad stuff. Well, here's King Nebuchadnezzar. This is a stone carving that still exists today. There he is on the right. And everything is stylized for a reason. He's bigger, right? He's the more important guy. Here come the magicians and the sorcerers. They're pleading with him. Look, and I love what Pastor made reference to. Look, he says, no, you don't just I'm not going to tell you the dream and then you interpret it. You've got to prove that you know what you're talking about. Tell me the dream and then do your interpretation. And you see here, they were sun worshipers too. So here we have the three magicians, sorcerers, King Nebuchadnezzar on his throne, and then way up here, with the strings on the sun here, way up on the top there, you can see a godlike figure with multiple arms manipulating the sun. So it was true to form. All right, now we're going to do some reading. Let's turn to chapter 2 in Daniel. I will start at verse 27. I want you to pay attention to Daniel's true humility and humbleness. Daniel answered the king, and now we just went through what Pastor described. They failed, right? And they were going to be killed. The man in charge of killing those guys was intercepted by Daniel. So we've gone through all that, and Daniel's trying to stall to save these guys' lives. He's brought before the king, and he says in chapter 27, no wise men, enchanters, magician, or astrologers can show to the king the mystery that the king has asked. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Okay, this is a prophetic demonstration. Your dream and the visions of your head as you lay in the bed are these. To you, O king, as you lay in bed, came the thoughts of what would be after this. And he who reveals mysteries made known to you what is to be. But as for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because of my wisdom, okay, here's his humbleness, that I have more than all the living, but in order that the interpretation may be known to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your mind. To further demonstrate more of his humility, we're not going to do it today, but read verse 20 through 23 later. Now I need somebody to read for me, please, 31 through 35. Micaiah?
Sure.
Go ahead.
You saw, O king, and behold, a great image. This image, mighty and of exceeding brightness, stood before you, and its appearance was frightening. And this image was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its middle and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. As you looked, a stone was cut out by no human hand, and it struck the image on its feet of iron and clay, and broke them into pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, and silver, and the gold altogether were broken in pieces, and became like chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This was the dream. Now we will tell the... Oh wait, that's 36.
That's just fine, thank you. And who wants to start at 37 and go through 34? Anyone?
44?
40?
37 to 44?
Yes, thank you. Who wants to do that? Somebody? I will pick you unless you volunteer. Easy.
You, O king, the king of kings, to whom God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, and the might, and the glory, and into whose hand he has given wherever they dwell, the children of man, the beasts of the field, and the birds of the heavens, making you rule over them all. You are the head of gold. Another kingdom inferior to you shall arise after you, and yet a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And there shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. And like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all of these. And as you saw in the feet and the toes, partly of the potter's clay, and partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom, but some of the firmness of iron shall be in it, just as you saw iron mixed with soft clay. And the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay. So the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. As you saw the iron mixed with soft clay, so they will mix with one another in marriage. But they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. And the days of those kings, and the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to other people. It shall break into pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever.
Okay, great. What I love about God is his sovereignty, sovereign setting up of power and taking kingdoms away, as Pastor alluded to earlier. And the fact that we cannot follow laws and rules. We're sinners, right? The only thing that, which I thought was brilliant, we can do is repopulate. Here we have, now look at this figure. Now, I don't know why, but somebody on Etsy is making these things. You can buy a little figure of this statue. I don't know why you'd want it in your house. But
It's so beautiful.
maybe for demonstration, I don't know. And what I love about this representation, okay, the head who Daniel describes is Nebuchadnezzar, okay? The whole statue just reeks of arrogance, right? This sort of, these unstoppable civilizations. Now, Babylon is the head of gold. Now, you see the dates there. I'm not going to die in the battlefield with any of the dates, but suffice to say that each one represents a new kingdom, right? You have Babylon the first, Medo-Persia. That's the chest of arm and silver. You can see it's all adjacent to the next.
So that was Cyrus the Great, right?
Yes?
Yes.
Thank
Cyrus
you.
the Great.
Greece, 331 BC to 168 BC. Pagan Rome, legs of iron. Now we have a divided Rome here. And this is interesting if you want to go to the close-up of the feet. This is pretty good. Iron isn't the strongest metal anyway, but you throw in clay with it. I worked with clay for a long time. It breaks really easy. And so, essentially reflective of a empire that is scattering and crumbling. Now, I'm going to read the very last part to you, and you tell me what you think this tells you about these kingdoms and the final kingdom. All right. The king answered and said to Daniel, "Truly your God is God of gods and Lord of kings and revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery." And then I'm going to drop down. Oh, I missed my other verses. Hang on a second here. "And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces, and all these kingdoms bring to an end, and it shall stand forever." I just realized that Izzy read that. Just as you saw that a stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand. Now, who do you think is delivering that stone to destroy the kingdoms?
Go.
Yes. Did you say God?
Yeah.
Very good. "The bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. A great God has made known to the king what shall be after this." Okay, this is all prophecy to him at that time. "This dream is certain and its interpretation sure." Comments, anyone?
Okay, so the bronze is Greece. That's Alexander the Great, right, Dad?
And his successor kingdoms.
And his successor kingdoms. Obviously Rome, and then the papal Rome. That's like the Byzantine Empire and the
Roman Empire.
Yeah. And then isn't the? Do you want me to tell you what the stone is?
Yes,
That's,
go ahead.
That's the church, right?
That's what I would say. God and the church, eventually Jesus, right?
Those are the mysteries that everybody argues over. So, yeah, the idea is solid and very much in agreement on Babylon, Medo-Persia,
Greece sometimes labeled Macedonia because it was Macedonia, and the iron is clearly Rome. And then everybody has their opinion as to what the stone is and what the divided feet of iron and clay are, and that's where all agreement goes pear-shaped. So this is one theory, and it's a good theory. And we can't quite nail that down because it hasn't been destroyed by the stone yet. So,
This is a close-up of that
Yep.
image I showed, if you just want to pass that around. But keep going, Pastor.
so yeah, I'd be curious to know how they come up with the dates on that. 1798 seems like Napoleon Bonaparte's doing something. And why they ended there is the question I would have.
Well, in every one of these
When-
has
when did
that date different.
When did the Byzantine, when did?
Byzantium came down in 1453, and so it's, yeah, I don't know why
To
that.
the Turks.
Yeah,
There.
and
So where did they get the 1798?
I'm not
If
sure.
it was the papal Rome, I could, divide Rome, I would see it would be the end of the Byzantine. Was it?
But I think that other
Potentially.
slide that has this similar image, the dates are different.
Probably.
And so, like I said, I'm
Yeah.
not gonna die on the battlefield. Pastor is the date guy.
So I'm a historian, but you did a really good job with illustrating, like, essentially what we are confident on and what we're less confident on in interpreting this particular dream. So, the rock cut from human hands has something to do with the kingdom of God. The church is not necessarily the kingdom of God. That's actually where I have a different theology than the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church thinks they are the kingdom of God, and that's why they're everywhere.
I
But
interpret this as
yeah.
man trying to be
establish.
bigger than they are,
Mhm.
and God, with a mighty stone, can crush it all. That's
Mhm.
kind of where I land, but that's a theory too.
Yep.
So, that was difficult.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you read up on people's interpretation of Daniel 2, I think you'll find consistently the divergences on their interpretation of the feet of clay and iron. And collect them, evaluate them until it gets smashed. It's really hard to know what that last one is.
I've heard that the 10 toes are also separate, is that true?
Possibly. Some people look at that as being like the 10 different successor kingdoms to the Roman Empire, and they connect them to modern day European countries. But that's a theory. It's not nailed down easily. So that's one of those difficulties. Remember the lesson earlier about the mountaintop prophecy? Is you have Babylon's one of the peaks that connects very directly to the Medes and the Persians, which connects very closely to the Macedonians, and you have very clean cut transitions. We have no gaps going on. We know once we hit Rome, we hit a gap. We hit this huge valley, so to speak, in prophetic vision where we can't see what's going on. And so we don't know what's happening when it comes back up into prophetic view. And so when you go from the legs of iron down into the feet of iron and clay, I would argue that there's a gap in there in the prophetic vision that we're missing the details of, because it's not clear at this point in time what that's referring to.
Which makes chapter 7 just as hard.
Which also makes chapter 7 crazy.
Because here we have essentially two prophecies, two different
Mm-hmm.
lineages of leaders, but Daniel is there for both.
Yep.
You know, and he's involved in this. And
Yep.
that's one thing I'd like to illustrate too, is his humility. Here you have all these arrogant sorcerers and astrologers who think they have all the answers. And one guy that's the most humble of all, ultimately getting his message from God and interpretation.
Yep.
He's able to lay it out.
Yep.
And he was saved those lives,
Yeah.
because they would have been slaughtered. I read too, I wouldn't die on the battlefield this either, when he says, I'm gonna cut you to pieces. Dismemberment was a common way to bury a body.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if that was gonna be the case before their death, or cut them up after a more humane death.
Right. Yeah, the one thing that most people usually try to do is, since the feet are partially iron and partially clay, most people figure that the iron means there's some connection between Rome and whatever the feet of clay and iron are. So,
Yeah, I read some commentary, and again, I'm not sure either, that the strength might have from the iron would represent some kind of military capability, but
Mm-hmm.
like you say, I mean, that one could still remain opened up.
Yeah.
It's so
Well,
hard.
and since throughout history, since the fall of Byzantine, the Roman Empire and the Byzantine Empire, there's been a lot of whatever, that have connected themselves to Rome. You look like at Charlemagne,
Mm-hmm.
then you also even the Nazis to some degree, they brought in, used some Roman symbolism during the Third Reich.
Yep.
So there was, and Mussolini. So there, throughout history, we've always had all these usually not good people too,
Mm-hmm.
drawing links from Rome.
Yep. It's really prominent in just Western civilization in general because Rome was such a domineering empire when in its heyday, and its fall was so cataclysmic for all the areas.
Rome
Impacted.
stole all of their parliament buildings and Ionic order columns from Greece.
Yes, they were horribly guilty of reappropriating Greek culture
Yeah, all of it.
entirely.
We did
so,
too, a little bit with
What,
oil.
what
Yep.
if the feat of iron and clay is like the Mongol Empire or something fun like that?
well, they fell. So then, what was the stone hitting it? Yeah.
Woodville was scratches.
Yeah. Since Rome, there have been some other major empires, and even simultaneous with Rome is when the Chinese Empire came into being, and you had this huge Western Empire and this huge Eastern Empire, and they actually had armies that came within spitting distance of each other once in the middle of Afghanistan, but they didn't quite directly meet ever.
Oh, if they did.
They were so close.
When was that?
In the 250s, maybe. Yeah, it was well after Jesus, but
Have historians calculated who would
anyway, so yeah, the Mongolian Empire was the next largest empire. The British Empire was a seaborne, magnificent empire, and in some ways, the American Empire today is very different than any previous empire, but it's perhaps even more expansive, and that just gets into political theory. And it's 10 after 8, so we should wrap up there. But good presentation on Daniel chapter 2. Sorting out what we know and what we can guess at.
I forgot to talk about timing, but in the neighborhood of
Mhm.
600 BC, correct?
On when this, about 600 BC, this would have taken place. Yep.
Thanks, everybody. I was really nervous about that.
No, that was good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good.
Yep.
It's good.
Good visuals.
Mhm.